Okay, I interrupted you when I turned the recording on, which I meant to do before. Is it really necessary to do what?
If you're limited on space, and that's one of the reasons I haven't turned mine in, because I'm trying to get things into a one-page letter. Is it really worth the space to mention a college degree when that's in the resume? Is that going to compel them to ask for an interview just by mentioning it?
I guess I'm not sure what you mean when you say mentioning it.
I guess real estate here is at a premium, and since the college degree is very evident on the resume, which presumably the ATS would run through as well, is it worth taking up that space to say, oh, by the way, I have a college degree in the cover letter?
If you can weave it in there, and you do it, you can do it. There's many ways, Doug, that you can weave these things into a sentence, and without, taking away any opportunity for somebody to put this sentence in the cover letter. Just saying something like, while pursuing my 4-year college degree, I gained extensive parts warehouse experience working for an agricultural equipment dealership. That's one sentence. Mm-hmm. And you've hit how many of the key words just in one sentence. So it's a matter of trying to figure out, all right, I've got, I'm looking here at how many I've highlighted. Let's say we got 20 words here. How are we going to weave those 20 words into as few sentences as possible while we're positioning the client for the job that they're looking for? And it's a skill. It takes time to be able to do that, particularly when we're in the habit of writing what we've done in the past, a lot of these generic cover letters. I'm applying for the position of, and we tell the client fill in the blank, and then they just, reiterate what's in the resume. So it's a matter of just weaving that in there. If I were to take the next sentence, then I might say something like, supervising personnel at Western Equipment required me to multitask in a fast-paced environment where we were serving as many as 40 customers an hour. And now I've got one more sentence, and I've weaved in a couple more keywords. I was able to maintain a $1 million inventory by establishing Excel spreadsheets and implementing the ERP program. So now I've got 3 sentences, and I've used up almost all of the keywords already. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's an Irish.
Yeah.
And all I can say is just keep practicing at it. But if you try to write the letter before you do this piece where you've identified, okay, these are the words I need to weave in there. Now, how can I tell the client's story using these words? It's almost like the assignment is, all right, you have to write an essay of a 400-word essay, and you have to use these words.
Mm-hmm.
You can't use any other words. and then you fill in around them. And what I think we're in the habit of doing is writing the letter and trying to work the words in instead of, okay, these are the words that I need to work into the letter. It's going at it at a different approach. Mm-hmm. So you look at that and you go, okay, Candace has all of those skills. How is she going to be able to say it as if she only had 5 minutes on the phone with the employer? Because that's kind of what the cover letter is doing. It's speaking for the candidate because they don't have the opportunity to be there in person.
Lauren,
any other questions or comments?
Lauren, if we go about it, we use the words rather than, like, for instance, rather than using profitability, if we use the words profitable, does that make the ATS system register?
It depends, and I'm going to jump into the ATS stuff tonight to kind of address that a little bit more.
Okay.
But it is going to depend on the particular system, and I'll go back to that one. So hold that question, Ronnie. Is there anything else about this? Yeah, go ahead.
How about for the NRWA? Can you answer that tonight too?
For the certification?
Yes.
Yes. I'll
Okay.
definitely go back to that too. So anything else on this particular exercise? I don't know if that helped people or made them feel even more overwhelmed, but it is a craft, and it's all about being able to deliver your message very tightly and succinctly. So now you've got the words. All you got to do is figure out, how am I going to weave these into a story? And keeping in mind that you want your first sentence to be something that really catches attention. I don't know, Brenda, did you get on the line yet? I think everybody's about here right now.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, I'm gonna just share, because Brenda turned in her homework, and I loved her opening statement. Although she alluded to something that the rest of us didn't know from reading Candace's profile. But she started her cover letter by saying, "Growing up as the only girl with 4 brothers has been an advantage, as my career has led me into several positions in shipping, logistics, and inventory control." So it was kind of a unique approach to come in with, as opposed to just jumping right into the position. Brenda used the strategy of, okay, Candace is going to introduce herself first and reveal what is behind her decision to go into shipping, logistics, and inventory control, because she grew up in a household with 4 brothers. So thank you, Brenda. She told us inside information about Candace we didn't know. But I'm going to close this down, and I will email it out to everybody tonight. And, you got another week, get everything together. And let me pull up my PowerPoint again, and then I'll put the call on mute, and we'll run through these things tonight. I can remember how to do this. Okay, so we got the PowerPoint on the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me see who's here, too. I've got Ronnie, Tiffany Roberts. Hi, Tiffany. Doug, LJ, Oregon. Who's in Oregon? I can't remember where everybody is, and you don't always come up by names. Oregon, yeah, that's Tiffany. And then I've got Pennsylvania. Oh, that's LJ. You're calling in from Pennsylvania tonight, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And who else is on the line? Christina's on the line. Sheila, are you on?
I'm here.
Okay. Okay, good. And I know Suzanne won't be with us tonight. Tiffany Bidding, are you here? And Mark? Mark likes to hide in the shadows, I think. Okay. Let me just...
And Brenda's here.
All right, I'm going to mute the call. Okay, so I actually took half of this week's presentation and half of next week's, and I created a new PowerPoint for you. 2 reasons that I did that. One is that as I was reviewing all the homework assignments, I'm still bothered by what appears to be a lack of proofreading and self-editing. And I say appear because maybe you're all doing the best that you can do in that area. So I wanted to give you some good inside tips on how to be more effective with your proofreading and editing. Also acknowledging that it's not necessarily a strength that everybody has. For me, I feel like it's kind of a talent and a curse because I can look at something right away and see the problem unless I was the one that wrote it. So just for an example, today, a new colleague contacted me by email. I noticed that she said connect with me on LinkedIn in her email signature, so I clicked on it. I went to her LinkedIn profile, and like immediately I saw 4 typos and 2 proofreading errors, editing errors, and I was like, oh God, why do I have to see that right away? I don't mean to do that. I want to see the positive first. So if you're not a person who's very, very detail-oriented, you're going to have to really, really work hard at this because it's not your natural strength. Your strength is somewhere else, and I'll rely on you for whatever that is. So we're going to go over the difference between proofreading and editing, the common things that we're seeing when we're grading samples and that I'm seeing in homework assignments so that you can pay attention to what's messing you up. I'm going to introduce to you a self-editing system that I came across that I found to be very, very helpful. And then I'm going to grab some stuff out of what was previously session 10, and I'm going to go through applicant tracking software and the document formatting do's and don'ts. I think I mentioned in my email that I was on a call last week with the certification chair and one of the graders she was like one of the original creators of the NCRW exam. And I was so happy that we all reached consensus that we were no longer going to be requiring NCRW candidates to submit ASCII resumes. So I eliminated that from tonight's session. And we're also not requiring the email cover letter, the ASCII cover letter. So I've eliminated that. We are going to be asking in the new testing standards that you show an understanding of what ATS is, and if the resume that you're submitting needs to be modified to get through the ATS, that you'll send us a modified version in addition to the one. So one of the things that you'll discover as we go through this tonight is because the ATS has gotten so sophisticated over the last 3 to 4 years, it's rare that we actually need to have 2 different documents anymore. You can create a very creative, visually appealing resume that will still get through applicant tracking software, and that's great news. So I'll cover some of that stuff tonight, too, and hopefully answer any questions you all have about it. So jumping into the proofreading and editing, and I'm starting here with the differences because, believe it or not, this has been an ongoing issue with the NRWA. I've been one of the volunteers for the organization that's done proofreading and editing for many, many years with the newsletter and the marketing materials that go out. And when I originally signed on, I signed on with the intent of proofreading. And I was finding that I was spending many, many hours every month editing things that were written by professional writers. And I was discovering, much to my surprise, that people didn't understand there is actually a difference between proofreading and editing. And it's really important for us as professional writers to know how to do both and to do both effectively. So proofreading is that process of correcting the grammatical, spelling, and typing errors. It's looking over the document and figuring out, is there a punctuation error here? Is there a misspelled word? That's proofreading. It requires meticulous reading and attention to detail. So you can't just scan when you're proofreading. You really do need to pay attention to the words that you're reading and being very detailed about it. Now, editing goes beyond proofreading, because editing is actually looking at what you've written and making revisions to or suggestions about the content. And when you're editing, you're not just only looking for grammatical errors and typos, but you're focusing on improving the accuracy of the language. You're looking at the rhythm and the flow. You're looking at how well it's understood, how well the information is organized within the document and within the sentence. So it's a much more in-depth process, which also includes looking at grammar and spelling, the basic proofreading. The difference is with proofreading, you're looking, the attention to detail is primary. But with editing, it requires not only a good background in English language, but you also have to have really good intuition. You have to have that ability to look at something and go, this just doesn't feel right. It's something about it tells me that it needs to be changed. Now, you may not know what it needs to be changed right away, but it's that intuition. And not everybody comes by that naturally. So if it's not a strength of yours, then definitely employ, the assistance of somebody you know, a friend, a family member, another resume writer, and have them look at it. I have one colleague who contacted me through career directors. She recognized that editing was not her strength. So she sends me all of her resumes before she sends them to the clients, and I go through it, and I'm able to do that. I can look at it and go, I don't know, Karen, something about this isn't making sense, or I don't understand the meaning of what you're saying there. Because a lot of times when we're the writer and we've talked to the client, it seems crystal clear to us what we were saying, but somebody else steps in as a fresh reader, and they may not be able to get an understanding. So knowing what those two things are is going to be a critical piece of you reviewing your documents and not doing just one or the other. You have to be able to do both. So the things that we're seeing the most frequently when we're looking at, did I skip one? Yeah, no. The things that pop up most frequently in terms of proofreading, and I hope to, between now and next week, to kind of give everybody a little check sheet of what I'm noticing, because I find that most writers, they seem to have some things that they do almost consistently. And if you're aware of that, you're going to tend to go back and look at it a little bit more closely, so that when you're proofreading your documents, you're really looking for these things. So common mistakes, putting two spaces after a period or a colon. It should only be one space. So you want to check that. Putting extra spaces between the words. And if you remember, I showed you how you turn on the reveal codes when you're in Microsoft Word. That's the best way to figure out whether or not you've got those extra spaces between the words and after the periods and the colons. If you're fully justifying the document, meaning your left and your right margins are even, it's much more difficult to see these extra spaces because justified text is not spaced incrementally on the page. It's kind of pulled out. So if you're created your document and you use full justification, it might be a good idea when you're proofreading it, just do left justify. And then when you're all done, go back and change it over to full justify if you prefer that look. Extra space at the beginning of a line, and I intentionally made that mistake here on the slide so you could just see how easy it is to do that and maybe not pick it up. And I see this quite frequently when I'm looking at a list of bulleted accomplishments. The writer didn't realize it, but they, did the bullet and then maybe inadvertently hit the space bar before they started typing. Or maybe at some point they changed a word. So, you go in, you create your initial draft, and you start changing things. Well, that's when problems start to crop up. The space before and after the N dash, the M dash, and the forward slash. The N dash is that little thing you're putting between the dates. It looks like a hyphen, but it's not. It's a symbol. And grammatically, there should be no space before it or after it. The M dash is that longer line. It kind of takes the place of parentheses. It's showing that there's a break in thought. No space before and after it. So if you're putting an M dash between two words, it's going to touch each word on either side. And the forward slash, takes the place of that either or. There was for a long time I don't know if it was factual, but there was a lot of argument about, ATS can't read the words if there's not a space before and after. If you've ever heard that, forget it. It's not the case anymore. So grammatically, don't put spaces between these. Inconsistent spacing between content and symbols. And that happens a lot when you're putting symbols, for example, in a row of competencies, or you're using symbols to break up sections of an address line. You have to be careful. If you're going to type the city and state and then do two spaces, a bullet, two spaces, and the LinkedIn or email address, then the next time you put a bullet in there or a symbol, you got to make sure it's two spaces again. So you want to, double check for that. And again, the best way to do it is turn on that reveal code. And then inconsistent line spacing. I was proofreading a resume today for another writer, and she had a bulleted list under each of the jobs for the accomplishments. And under one job, the bulleted statements were 1 point spacing in between. And then the next job, it was 2 point spacing in between. And then the next job, it was a combination. Some of the bullets were 1 point space, and some of them were 2 point space. So we look for that kind of stuff. And it may not show up to you right away. So you want to pay attention to that. If you're using incremental line spacing, then when you're proofreading your document, make sure that you're checking your incremental line spacing to be sure you were consistent throughout. Other proofreading oversights, there's the missing or the incorrect punctuation. So if it's a complete thought, meaning, it's a subject and a verb, there should be a period at the end. And you want to make sure that if you have the period at the end of one bullet, there's a period at the end of every bulleted statement. Where you put the periods, and this is always kind of tricky. With parentheses, you put the period outside of the parentheses. And you'll notice that if it's quotation marks, the period goes inside the quotation mark. And the best way to do that, if you're somebody who's not sure where the period goes, mark that in your Gregg reference manual and make a mental note. When I'm proofreading, I have to make sure that I put the periods where they're supposed to be. And then just double check yourself as you're going through that. Hyphens, they're a huge error that shows up. Either they're missing or they're used incorrectly. So if you're using hyphens and you tend to make mistakes in that area, again, mark it in your Gregg reference manual and pay attention to that. Something that you're going to have to look for every time you proofread your documents. Apostrophes and accent marks, those, the accent marks, usually the only time you're going to see those is in the cover letter when you use the word resume. But the apostrophes, I see those sneak in a lot of times. They'll show up at the end of a word that ends in S, even though it wasn't a plural possessive of the word. Or they're before the S when they should be after the S, or any number of things. So you want to pay attention to that. The Oxford comma, the serial comma, and I had mentioned this back when we were doing the grammar class. That's that comma that in a series it'll appear before the word and. Years ago, we never put a comma before the word and. Now, the general grammatical rule is if you use the comma before and it's called the serial comma or the Oxford comma, then you have to be consistent throughout your document. So when I'm proofreading a resume for a colleague and the first time I hit a sentence where that comma appears before and, then I pay attention to that the entire time I'm reading the document. Did they use it every single time? And 9 times out of 10, they miss them. So we look for that when we're grading. Granted, our clients don't know, the employers don't know, but that really doesn't matter. We're not writing for, just the common public. We're writing because we're the professionals, and we want to do it correctly, whether or not it's being noticed by other people. It's going to be noticed by the graders if you're wanting to go for certification. But, more importantly, we are professionals, so we want to be the best at what we do. The closing quotation marks, and this one's always a tricky one, too. If the periods and commas go inside, so if you've got a quotation within a sentence and it's the last words in the sentence and you're going to put a period, the period goes inside the quotation mark. However, the semicolon, the colon, and the dashes go outside. And rather than try to remember that, make a note. I have little Post-it notes stuck all over the outside of my Greg reference manual because I know there's things that I always have to check. I always have to check my hyphens, and I always have to check where the commas and periods go. So you just want to get used to doing that. Okay, formatting inconsistencies, and I just gave you a couple of examples of that. So if you're using a lot of numerical figures, make sure that you're using them consistently throughout. So if you're writing, for example, 3 million, and you're going to use the capital M to represent million, then you don't want to later on spell out the word thousand because you've established a standard that is saying when I'm abbreviating large numbers, I'm going to use M and K, and you don't want to just switch back. Also, one of the ones I was proofreading yesterday, sometimes the writer capitalized million, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they capitalized billion, sometimes they didn't. So you have to be consistent with that. If you're going to spell out a number like 12, then always spell it out. If you prefer to save space by just using the numeric version of the number, then be consistent in doing that. Be consistent when you're doing your work experience and you're listing your dates. Don't in one place spell out the month, another place abbreviate the month, and somewhere else use the numeric versions of the month. Also be consistent with how you're representing the range of dates. So if one job you're writing 2010 to 2016, don't go to the next job and decide this time you're going to use the en dash, and then go to the next job, and this time you're going to use the en dash, but you're going to put spaces before and after it. And sometimes this happens because we're taking what the client gave us originally and maybe not remembering to go back and make the changes. So it's all about staying on your toes. Other inconsistencies are things like the bullet sizes and the bullet styles. I see that switching back several times. Even it can be something as subtle as a resume I was proofreading this week. They used the diamond symbol at the beginning of each of the accomplishment statements, and all the way through the resume, the diamond was a dark gray. And then I got to the very last job, and all the diamonds were a much lighter gray. It's just subtle things like that. Or maybe all the job titles were in blue, but suddenly a job title pops up and it's in black. Or, the company names were underlined, but you forgot to underline one of the company names. The indents and the alignments, they may not be even. You start out and you figure, well, I'm going to left align everything, but then later on you switch over and now you fully aligned. And then you switched back again. You can't do that on resumes. You find a style and stick with it, and then when you're proofreading, pay attention to what style did I start with and did I carry that throughout. The text outside the margins, that's when I was showing you in the formatting class where you have to pay attention to where those margin markers are, and you don't just grab the indent to pull the text out to the margin. You actually have to reset the margins. The font enhancements, like I just said, bold, underline, italics, and then the line spacing. Other errors that show up all the time are the spelling errors. And all of these examples on this slide are all things I have done wrong, and either in my own work or when I was proofreading for someone else and I missed them. So I thought I'd share with you my stupidest mistakes. One of the most common ones, and I don't only see myself do this, but quite a few times I'll see people type the word mange or manger instead of manage and manager. So there's a lot of words like that they are so close in appearance that we may only see what we thought we typed instead of seeing what was actually there. The second example there was actually an embarrassment I had as a college freshman when I was writing a term paper for my adolescent psych class, and I was talking about the changes in the body changes when one goes through adolescence. And I remember getting the paper back from my instructor, and he had circled the word public next to hair and wrote, usually they try to keep this quite private. So that was how I learned the difference to pay attention between public and pubic. Lose and loose. I actually had a colleague that called me out on it one day, and she sent me a lesson. She wrote up a lesson for me, and I put it in my grammar and proofreading notebook, and every time I get ready to type one of those words, I have to go pull out the lesson she wrote for me because I can still never remember when do I use the one with the two O's and when do I use the one with the one O. And choose and chose is another one. I don't trust myself, so I have a cheat sheet. Create a cheat sheet. It'll make it easier for you. Reversing letters. You type up an acronym and you turn the letters around, and then suddenly the acronym's not what you intended. Missing letters. This was one I was proofreading a document for a colleague, and he had a section called Early Career, and I missed the Y. I just didn't see that he didn't have the Y there, and I read Early Career. And then when he sent it to the client actually called it out. So you have to be careful of that. And then my favorite was when I was applying for a job, and in my cover letter I said that I had strong quality control and attention to detail. And after I mailed it, I was rereading it and went, oh my God, not only did I make a mistake, but I made a mistake when I was talking about my attention to detail. So, we all make mistakes. It's just being aware of what they are and then creating a little aids for yourself. So let me take you through this self-editing system. And what's really, really important here is that the reason these are numbered is you must do these steps in this order. This is the most effective way to proofread and self-edit. So the very first step is put some distance between yourself and your work. Depending on what your time frame is, set it aside. At least set it aside for a minimum of an hour and go do something else. Don't try to proofread it as soon as you've completed it, even if you're in a rush to get it out the door. Ideally, if you can go back and look at it the next day, you're going to see it very differently. But always make that your first step. Put it aside. The second thing is really know what your weaknesses are. And I've been saying that all along through this presentation. Be aware of the things that you keep doing wrong. Be aware of the words that you misuse, the spelling errors that you make, and come up with a system that can help you. And as I said, I have a 3-ring notebook, and I print out whenever I realize a mistake. I'll print out the rule, and I keep that 3-ring notebook next to me. It's a bright red cover, and it's I need to check myself because I'm not sure about this notebook. And then I have Post-it notes all over my Greg reference manual. And sometimes I'll even put Post-it notes on my monitor because there's some things that will continue to trip me up. And I'm a good proofreader. So if you're not a good proofreader, don't try to cut corners. I remember trying to tell my mother she needed to write things down because she kept forgetting things, and she said, but I feel stupid when I write things down. Don't feel stupid when you write things down. You're more stupid if you forget things. So use some little aids. Then the third thing that you want to do, now you've put some distance between it, you know what your weaknesses are, and you've created your aids. Now go back and pick up the document and just read it like a reader. Don't read it like an editor. So first of all, just read it first for comprehension, and then just make like a little tick mark on the side of your paper, and it's really a good idea to do this. Print it out. Don't try to do it on your screen. Just make a little note of if something didn't make sense. So you're not editing right now. You're just reading it, and you're getting a sense about, what are you picking up just through that reading phase, and is there any place that you hesitated? And that's always a really good clue. If you had to hesitate or you had to read something again, that means that when you get to the next step, you're going to want to go back and take a closer look at that. So after you've done those 3 steps, then you're going to start that first line of editing. So you're not doing an in-depth editing at this point. You've read it through. You might have noticed some things right away. And now you're going to go back and you're going to take care of those things that jumped out at you. You're going to correct the typos. You're going to fix any spelling errors you had. You're going to, check and correct any of your grammar and punctuation. You're going to look for redundancy. The one I was proofreading today, I just kept seeing the same words showing up over and over. Sometimes I'd read a sentence and the word was in there 3 times. One example that stands out really clear in my mind was the client's job was consultant, and the very first line of his job description said that he served in a consulting role for a consulting company. And it's stuff like that makes you stop and go, okay, wait a minute, I got a redundancy here. I need to go back and change something. I need to find a different word. Go back after you've written it and use your red pen and cross out as many ands, and does as you possibly can, because that's that telegraphic writing that we use as resume writers, and a lot of the samples that we review and the tests that we review, the writer just didn't take the time to go back and get rid of all those ands, and does. You can't eliminate all of them, or the writing gets very awkward, but you can usually eliminate 80 to 90% of them, and you've got a nice, tight document. So look for that when you're proofreading. And then a really excellent tip is to scan the document in reverse. Just scan it. You're not really reading now, but you start at the right, and you just let your eyes travel right to left instead of left to right. And then you look at the bottom of the document, and you scan going up the document. You're going to be surprised the things that will jump out at you that you didn't see when you were back at step 3 and you were just reading the document. Because we read what we think we wrote. We don't necessarily read what's on the page. So then you get into the more in-depth editing. Perform a line edit. So you're going to look at each sentence separately. Read that sentence, verify that everything is okay, and then go on and read the next sentence. As you're looking at those sentences, see if you can tighten them up. Can you get rid of any extra words? Can you get rid of any extra phrases? The one I was proofreading today, she kept talking about product offerings, software offerings, and I was like, why does she keep saying offerings? If the client is selling products, they're selling products. They don't need to sell product offerings. So you can just look for those words that maybe you're just in a habit of using in your language, but you don't need them in your writing. So get rid of them. Look for those misplaced modifiers, those words that are, modifying a noun, but they seem to be in the wrong place. Notice those things that have unclear meanings. Look for that awkward sentence structure. And then the parallel structure. It seems as though everybody struggles with that. You might as well be on alert that if you've got a series, you need to pay attention to, are things parallel? And don't just assume that you already know unless it's something that you've written before, because those parallel structure errors, they sneak in more than anything. So it's a line-by-line editing, one sentence at a time. It's not reading the whole thing. Then, when you've done that, now you go back and you look at the paragraph. You've looked at each sentence, now look at the overall paragraph. Do they vary in length? Or are you finding maybe that all your paragraphs are 2 lines? Or all your paragraphs are 6 lines, and maybe you need to adjust them? The orphans and widows, I am just so surprised how often I keep seeing that in the homework assignments I'm getting from class. Because I've said over and over again, do not have a word sitting on a line all by itself. And yet, every week I get homework assignments and there's words sitting on a line all by themselves. So that tells me immediately somebody didn't pay attention. They were not looking for the orphan words. They were just scanning, jumping over them. So you got to look for those. Widow lines are where you start a sentence at the bottom of the page and you finish the sentence on the next page. You don't want to do that. You have to go back and fix that. If that happened, it may have happened without you realizing it. Maybe you changed your incremental line spacing, or maybe when you were editing, you added something or deleted something, and now your page break got changed. So you have to pay attention to what happened to the lines. And then you may have to move some of the paragraphs or the sentences to support a logical flow. For example, Candace created a challenge for us because she held 2 different jobs, the parts administrator and the marketing coordinator. And some of you like to break out each individual job. Well, if you're going to start with the marketing coordinator, it doesn't make sense to have the very first line of the job description say, acquired additional skills, when we don't even know what her original skills were. So you have to go back and look at that. Are they going in a logical order? Did we tell the story in the pace that it was going in? Did we reverse things? Did we present information before, the details before we presented the big picture? So you want to look for that. And now we're still only on step 6. So now we're going to go over to step 7, and I think this is probably one of the most critical things. And I think I'm even going to ask some of you to do this for me, because when I'm reading some of the homework assignments, I'm thinking they couldn't have read this out loud. Because if they read it out loud, they'd be having trouble reading this. Read your resume out loud. Print it out loud, out your resume and your cover letter, and read it out loud. And it's also really effective if you walk while you're reading it out loud. Pace. The more areas of your senses that you engage into the activity, the more alert you are. So when you're reading it out loud, if you're stumbling, if you're hesitating, if you're having to reread something, that tells you that you need to go back and edit. I just can't stress enough how much when I'm looking at the homework assignments, I just sit here going, they couldn't have read that. They may have read it in their head, but certainly if they'd read it out loud, they would have recognized the mistake was there. And I'm kind of speaking in general terms, because I kind of see it pop up with one person one week, and then I see it pop up with somebody else another week. And then repeat that step as many times as necessary. So in other words, you stumble, you go back, you edit, you're going to have to do it again. Get in the habit of reading your document out loud once, probably even twice, and always print it out. And then notice step 8 is probably the one that the majority of people do is step 1. They run it through a spelling and grammar check. Do not do that until you've completed all the other steps. You know that these spelling and grammar checks will not pick up the things that look like they may be correctly spelled. For example, the mange versus manage. And they don't always pick up the grammar either. Microsoft Word will flag a lot of things that really are not correct anymore. And related to that, you also don't want to rely on internet resources. An internet dictionary is your first line of defense because there's a lot of errors there. The only time I really turn to the internet is if I'm looking at a technical term, particularly when I'm proofreading a document that has computer terminology in it. Because the best way to know whether or not that computer terminology was written correctly is go to the website of the company that created the computer terminology, the technology. Otherwise, you end up missing camel cases, or you create 2 words when they should be 1, or you forget to capitalize things, or you capitalize when you shouldn't capitalize. So you can always rely on the internet for that. You can rely on the internet if you want to double check the way a company might spell or write their name. But don't rely on those online dictionaries because there's a lot of bad information out there. Go to your Gregg Reference Manual, go to your Merriam-Webster Dictionary, go to your Roget's Thesaurus, but do that And then when you're all done, then run it through the grammar and spelling check. So make that your last line of defense. So I'm gonna take this off of mute. I don't know. You may have all run away because I give my proofreading lecture and I get a little bit crazy. But it looks like everybody's still on here. And let me just see if anybody has any questions or comments. This is a lot of stuff I just threw at you. Best thing I could suggest is either print out these slides or type up this list and keep it handy until it becomes commonplace for you to do that, and get out of that habit of, oh well, I'm done writing, now I'm going to run a spelling and grammar check. Okay, it's good, now I'm going to send it off, because it isn't going to be. I can almost guarantee if you do. So you'll send it off with errors if you rely on your grammar and spelling check. So let me just run through here. Christina, anything in particular you wanted to say about this whole grammar editing, proofreading thing? I don't know if Christina's with me. I unmuted everybody. You probably all went, oh, I'm going to go make coffee or something. That's okay. Doug, how about you?
No, I think I realize now why I only went through 4 steps, not 8 steps to proofread documents.
Which ones did you skip?
All very useful tips. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the read out loud is the one, though, that I find the most effective. Tiffany Bidding, did you get on the call? I don't think she's on. She does a lot of work at night. And Sheila?
Yeah, I'm here. I had typed in the chat. Recently, I invested in Grammarly, and that has been phenomenal. I don't know if you've ever used that, Noreen, but it's
Grammarly, yes.
I struggle with it a bit, and I'm well aware of that. And Grammarly has been just priceless.
Yeah, and even beyond Grammarly is that other one I told you about, Daily Writing Tips, which it is a monthly subscription. That challenges me on a daily basis. Grammarly comes out with kind of big picture things, and they do what, weekly? Is that? They put out their newsletter?
I have it downloaded on my computer.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about that software application that you can download to your computer.
Yeah. And like you said, the word proof spell check and grammar doesn't, it catches 5% of what the in-depth that Grammarly. Right. Phenomenal.
The only thing I've ended up getting rid of Grammarly because it kept flagging all the fact that I left out the articles, and the. Yes. And I got tired of it doing that because it wanted them in there, and I'm trying to get in the habit of taking them out.
You can turn parts like that.
Can you? Do you have the paid version?
Yeah, for a while I was using the free, and then I thought I'd just give the paid version a try, and it is ridiculously more robust. It is. Good.
So Sheila's talking about Grammarly, Grammarly, and it's an online service that you can register and download this software to your computer, and then it will go through your document, and it'll actually tell you how many errors you have, and then it will make suggestions, right?
It does. Anything you're typing, whether you're typing in an internet text box or a Word document or whatever you're typing, it'll automatically provide that for you. And then at the end of the week, it sends you an email telling you what your biggest challenges are, your biggest opportunities, and what you're trying to do.
Good. But don't just rely on that. And again, I can't stress step number 7 enough. It's just so critical to read it out loud. How about you, Ronnie? Anything?
No, and I'm with Sheila. I have the Grammarly right now too, but Sheila, I haven't done the paid version yet. I'm getting ready to get there, so I was just wondering. To me, it seems like it's only on whatever computer you downloaded it to, so that's my problem because I have so many computers that I work off of. So I was just getting ready to get to doing my subscription to it. So I love it.
Contact them directly, Ronnie, and see if there's a way
I'm going to
put it on.
What was the other one? What was the other one you said, Noreen? You just mentioned
one.
Well,
I subscribe to it's called Daily Writing Tips, and every day I get an email lesson about a particular grammar, and then there's always a 5-question quiz. And I love taking those quizzes because they only take a couple of minutes, and I rarely get all the answers right. And I find that very humbling.
Yeah, because for me, that is to me, the punctuation, the grammar is a killer for me.
Yep, and reading it out loud. Yep. How about you, LJ?
I'm curious about this Grammarly. I think it might help me because I think I could use some help.
Well,
it's great.
Yeah, it helps you to tighten up your writing. I think that's really a biggie because, sometimes we don't understand that we can say it in a much shorter version. So, yeah, check it out. Check out the free version and use it for a while and see if you like it. And then if you do, you may want to download the paid version. And I know Suzanne's not with us. And Tiffany Roberts, how about you?
Yeah, no, good stuff. I appreciate it. I do read it out loud quite a few times, and I solve a lot of problems with that. And I, too, have Grammarly, and I did the paid version. And I'll have to say that I have the same problem with the articles. It keeps trying to put those in. But other than that, it seems to help me a little bit. I do find that it's not always right if you can check it next to the Great Reference Manual, so just use with caution. But all the other...
Good point. Yeah, you made a good point there, too, and I said this way back in the beginning. There are many, many different style guides out there, and the NRWA and the other resume writing associations, we follow the Gregg Reference Manual. So if you get a program like Grammarly, and they built their database around a different style manual, then they may not be flagging things that would be errors for our industry. So you have to be a little bit careful of that because of the different style manuals.
It helps you catch the ones that you kind of go, oh, duh, I should have thought that. So
yeah, and that's why it's good to have several steps. And, several different resources because we can get tripped up. And then how about you, Brenda?
Oh, this was very good. All good information. And I think that Grammarly is really good, but I have found that Grammarly is not always correct.
Yeah, that's what Tiffany was just saying. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it, like I said, is the difference in the style guides. Yeah, so it's just being aware of that. But that's my lecture. I just always have this thing about proofreading, and I'm always so embarrassed when I find stuff in my own, and yet I'm so impatient when I find it in other people's work. So if I call it out on you, it's just because that's my nature, and because I want you to hear it from me before you get it marked back, from one of the graders, and you're going, oh, gee, I should have seen that. So I'll just try to keep everybody on their toes. But let me just go through this ATS stuff quickly, and then I'll tell you what we're doing next week so that you can all, dread it with fear and trepidation. I don't know. All right, so I'm going to let. So just some of the basics that I wanted to tell you about ATS, just to kind of get a general understanding, and some of the things that I've discovered, and I love sharing these with my clients too. So, basically applicant tracking software, it's part of an entire human resource management software package. So usually when a company purchases something to manage their entire HR, the recruiting, the onboarding, the orientation, the performance reviews, it's all bundled in there together. And originally there weren't that many different systems out there. As a matter of fact, the first ATS was really Resumix. It was the one that the federal government came up with. at this point, there's close to 200 different systems out there. So when we ask questions like, well, do I need to do this for the ATS or do I need to do that? The answer oftentimes is it depends. It really depends on the particular ATS system that the client is applying through. And the best rule of thumb is to try to write for the least common denominator, write for the dumbest system, because if that system can handle it, then the most sophisticated systems can handle it. The ones that are most common are the ICIMS and Taleo, and Bullhorn is the one that I know Career Builder uses, and then there's another one that's pretty common called My Talent Link. When you look at a job announcement, usually you can tell what system they're using, and I pass this tip on to my clients all the time. In many cases, somewhere in the job announcement, you will either see the logo embedded for the system that they're using, or you might see small wording that identifies the system, powered by, it might say, and then it'll have a name. And that's telling you that's the applicant tracking software that particular employer is using. Another way to tell is to go up and look at the URL that's in the address bar. If somebody's using the Taleo system, you're going to see Taleo right up there in that address bar. It's going to appear along with the name of the job announcement and any other codes that identify the page that you're on. The systems now, they're reading the text and the code that's underneath the document. So those of you that have been around long enough to remember when DOS was powering computers long before Microsoft Word, there was a lot of embedded code. Or if you've done anything like website design, or you've worked with your own website designer, you know that while you've got content on your web page, there's also a lot of different code that has been embedded in that content that tells the system how to display the content on the screen. So when the ATS is reading the resume, it is not reading it as a critical thinker, and it's not necessarily reading the document as a whole, but it's actually looking at the text and it's looking at the code. So that is what influences what we want to put in the resume, as well as how we want to format it, the resume and the cover letter. The keyword relevancy and the placement and the number of times that the words are used, this affects the ranking. So when the HR people are actually programming the ATS system, and they take a job announcement and they put in the information that they want the ATS to look for, we don't necessarily know which words are going to get the highest ranking. We don't know, for example, when it's looking at Candace's resume, does the word college degree have qualify for more points than, say, the word sales goal? But what we do know is what the words are and where we place them in the resume. So the higher the word appears in the resume, the higher it ranks. So if you've got a keyword, so again, if we take this example of Candace's job announcement, it's saying college degree, and we only mention the college degree at the bottom of page 2, well, it's the things that are on page 1 that get a higher ranking in the system than the things that are on page 2. So we want to make sure that our most relevant keywords are appearing high in the resume. They're on the first page. They're higher up in the resume, because where we put them is going to determine the ranking. And then we want to use them as frequently as we can. So it doesn't mean that you keep repeating the word in the same sentence, but if the word is sales goal, well, then you want to weave that into as many of the different jobs as you possibly can so that it doesn't only appear once. Also, these systems will rank them higher if they're using context. So you don't want to do this keyword stuffing, which in some regards is what happens when people create a core competency list, but then they never tell when and where the client used that skill. So the applicant tracking software sees the keyword, and it may be high up on the resume, but it doesn't get as high a ranking as it would if it were used in a sentence context. The systems now have gotten sophisticated to the point that they will accept the .doc and the .docx, the majority of them. They'll also accept the RTF. If the document's saved as a TXT, then you're guaranteed every system is going to be able to read it. But the PDF, there are still some exceptions to that. So what we usually advise resume writers and job seekers is, even if the job announcement says that you can upload a PDF, you're better off uploading a .doc, a .docx, a rich text, or a text file. I have found, and those that have done much more research than I on ATS, the HR people don't always quite understand how the technology works. So when they're going, oh yeah, it's fine to do a PDF, they may not be the best source of information. So the best rule of thumb is, avoid the PDF. Functional resumes aren't appropriate. And the functional resume is when you're just presenting the client's experience under different skills areas, but you're not presenting them under actual job titles and company names. So what will happen is when the resume goes into the system is going to parse the resume. And I remember when I first heard that word, I didn't know what it meant. So if it's new to you, then I'll inform you the same way I got informed. What happens is the system then is going to take the resume and it's going to begin breaking it up, and it's going to start putting information into kind of a template. So the best way to think about it is if you consider a job application, what a job application looks like. There's a place where the name goes. There's a place where the address goes. There's a place where the company name goes, and then the dates, and then under that the job title, and then the responsibilities. The ATS system does the same thing with the resume. It takes it apart and it puts the information in this template into these categories. And this is why the functional resume doesn't work, because the ATS system is seeing information, but it doesn't know where it belongs. It didn't see a job title. It didn't see a company name. The ATS is programmed in such a way that it recognizes what is actually a company name. It recognizes what appears to be a job title. It recognizes what is a date, and it takes it apart and puts it all into this little template. And then it ranks the information that's in there. Another thing that I learned when I was digging into these a little bit more is, as I mentioned earlier, you can often tell what system the employer is using by what's in the job announcement. And the one that I found to be the most fascinating is pay attention, the next time you're looking at job announcements, if you see at the bottom of the announcement a logo and it says ICIMS and Taleo, and there's a couple of others that are like this, hover over that logo or hover over the title and click on it. It takes you to the company website. Now, ICIMS, if you click on that logo, it will take you to a site that has a very, very in-depth FAQ about how to format and manage a resume in the ICIMS system. I found it absolutely phenomenal. I could not believe that all of that information was there. Some of the other ones, when I've clicked on it, it will take me to the company site that created the applicant tracking software, and you can actually watch a demo video of how the resumes are received and parsed and ranked. The more you know about how these systems operate, the more effective you'll be in developing resumes that'll get your clients through the door. And, of course, whenever possible, we don't want our clients to just try to go through the ATS. We want them to make personal contacts. But the reality is they're going to have to, in many cases, go through ATS. So part of our job now as resume writers is not only to know how to create the document, but to really have a solid understanding about how these systems work, and not use these blanket statements like, oh, well, I heard the ATS does X, because with over 200 of them out there, it's just really too hard to say that. The other thing is basically there are two types of systems, and the one that was originally out there was more keyword-based. And this is the one that, I've talked about more, and the one that most of your questions are coming around. It actually will extract and match keywords to the job announcement. And it's pretty much like a card game. You've got a queen of hearts, I got a queen of hearts, we got a pair. Very unintuitive. It either matches or it doesn't match. However, many of these systems are getting much more concept-based, and the common ones that I showed you, the ICMS, the Taleo, are concept-based. And what that means is they are intuitive. They can actually interpret the meaning behind the words and the concepts. So, for example, in Candace's job announcement, one of the requirements was someone who had experience in purchasing. In a keyword-based applicant tracking system, the system would look for the word purchasing. In a concept-based system, if the resume said experience managing purchases, a concept-based applicant tracking system would be able to make that determination. It would be able to reverse terms. So like instead of client relationship management, it would be able to understand things like managing client relationships. So they're more sophisticated. It ranks based on the relevance and the recency, where the keyword doesn't do that quite as often. It recognizes alternate job titles. So you may use a job title that is somewhat different that was in the job announcement, but a concept-based system is sophisticated enough to be able to make that intuitive decision. It can look at related skills. It can say, oh, well, if they did telephone sales, then they probably also did customer service. It can look at relationships between words. It can evaluate the duration of a job. So it can look at the dates on the resume, and it can actually calculate how long the client was on that job based on the months and the years that were reflected on the resume, and then give the client a higher ranking. So again, if we take an example of Candace's job announcement, they wanted somebody with 5 years of experience. A concept-based resume, or ATS, could scan Candace's resume, and it could add up the years of experience that she was with Western Equipment, and then it could add to that the years of experience or months of experience at, Doche Cleaners, and it could actually calculate all of that and make a determination about whether or not the person had the required years of experience, and then it can rank candidates against each other based on that calculation. And it can also calculate the number of years in the industry. So it could go through and it could look at Candace's and go, oh, well, she's got 7 years in agricultural equipment, but she only has 1 year in retail. And it can calculate the number of years in a job title. So these are very sophisticated systems, and the hope is that as they continue to refine these will be the ones that we're going to be writing for. But because we're not always writing for them, we need to take into consideration, are we writing to that keyword-based one that may not have that ability? So it's deciding what keywords we're going to use and where we're going to place them, and then also deciding how we're going to format the resume. And a lot has changed here, and that's why I said at the beginning of this call that what used to be very stripped-down, basic, uncreative resumes, we can now do a lot more creative formatting on the resume, and the ATS system will still be able to read it. So in the past, everything had to be left aligned. The systems now can handle things that are center aligned. So if you want to center a heading, or you want to center an address, or you want to center the company name and the job title, that's fine. A few of them can handle right alignment, but since the majority can't, it's better that you don't put something on the right margin that, and I'm not talking about dates, but I'm talking about you're going to decide I'm going to be creative with the letterhead, and I'm going to put the address on the right margin and the name on the left. Avoid doing that. But the center alignment and left alignment are fine. Tables and columns are still a problem. They have gotten more sophisticated, but the general rule of thumb is if you embed a table in the resume, the system isn't going to read the table correctly. Now, the exception to that, and what you want to think about is the way the system is reading a table. Imagine you have a table that has 2 columns and 4 rows. The system will read column 1 on the left, then it'll go to column 2 on the right, but it doesn't go back over again. So it isn't crisscrossing. And what will happen is if you have a table, it will read straight down on the left, and then it will read straight down on the right, and then it becomes all jarbled in there. So if you're going to create a table on your resume, the only table that really is acceptable for the ATS is a table that consists of 1 column and 1 row, or 2 columns and 1 row would be the maximum. Best thing to do is just don't put anything important in a table, and you're going to be safe. Columns, what we're speaking about there is more the layout like a newspaper column, where you're putting some of your content in the left column, and then you're going over to another column and you're creating more content. You want to avoid doing that. The text boxes and the lines and the graphics, these used to be a big issue. The thing with the ATS now is they just ignore them. So it's okay to have a text box on your resume. If you want to put a nice fancy text box on there and, put an image in it or put a graphic in there or, put a quotation in there, it's fine. But keep in mind, the ATS is just not going to see it. So don't put something really critical in that text box because it won't be read. But the old rule of thumb that you couldn't have a text box, you can forget that. So we can put text boxes in there. They can look really nice. Lines and graphics, we can put those in there. We can put a graphic image in there. The ATS doesn't see it. It reads over it, so it doesn't create a problem. Avoid the real fancy bullets. Stick with the ones that are more traditional. Fancy bullets, primarily they would be things like wingdings and webdings. Stay away from them. Stick with the things like the circles, the squares, the diamonds, the more standard. If you use the fancy, it may come out as a different character when the ATS is reading it. These sans serif fonts, they're the easiest to read. Those are the ones that, are straight up and down. They don't have the curly cues on them like the Times New Roman. It is okay if you want to use the other ones. It's just, again, the sans serif tend to be read most by all of the systems with a lot more ease. The font enhancements are fine. The systems used to be they couldn't read anything that was underlined. Underlining is a little bit different than the graphic line. Underlining is, when you're actually using that underline key on your keyboard. It's fine now. Bold is fine. Color is fine. Small caps and all caps are fine. Italics is fine. So your resumes don't need to be ugly anymore. They can have a whole lot of different images and color and graphic lines and things to really distinguish them from the other resumes that are coming through the door. Other things with formatting, again, the no space before n-, m-, / I'm just bringing it up again because some people are still insisting that's a rule and it's not. The accent marks and the symbols, a lot of times they're going to be converted to junk. So you just may want to be careful of where you're using them. A good example is when you're putting quotations and apostrophes in a Microsoft Word document. Microsoft is actually using something called Smart Quotes. So it's creating an image that is different than what is actually on your keyboard. And then what will happen is the ATS sees that image, it doesn't recognize it, and it might turn it into a question mark or an ampersand. It's not a huge issue. It's just something to be aware of that it may be converted to a junk symbol. White space is very important. The more, you want to use your white space effectively. If the content is crowded on the page, it's more challenging for the ATS to read and to parse the resume. The number of pages is irrelevant. You have to tell clients this over and over again because people still think their resume needs to be one page long. The applicant tracking software has absolutely no interest whatsoever in how many sheets of paper because it's not reading the content. It's reading the text in the code, and it doesn't know how many pages it is. All the date formats are acceptable now. Used to be that the systems had to have the strict spell out the month, spell out the year. Any format is acceptable now. Just be consistent, and never omit the dates. And the other thing that's really a biggie, and I find this to be one of the most annoying things, is the dates need to be on the line with the job title. And if the client held numerous jobs with the company, then every time you list the date and the job title and the dates, you have to list the company name again. Because the ATS will see a job title, it'll see dates, and it'll go, well, I can't find the company. I don't know where to put this job. So you have to keep repeating the company name over and over again. And that, to me, like I said, that's kind of an annoyance because I like to summarize. One of the ways you can get around that is rather than break out each individual job with the dates, you can, in your job description paragraph, say something like, hired as accounting clerk, progressed through 5 promotions leading to, and then just have the dates for the one position that you're writing about. But if you break out each job title, you have to break out the dates, and then you have to repeat the company name. Other things about the formatting, never put the client's name and contact information in the document header. It should always be in the document. So if you're in Microsoft Word and you're clicking the function that says Insert Header, and then you're typing the client's name and address, don't do that. The ATS will not read what's in a document header and a document footer. So it will not see the client's name and contact information. Don't include the degree or the credential next to the client's name. So you don't want to put, Joe Smith, PhD, or, Jack Jones, RN. You can put it underneath. You can put it in the heading, but don't attach it to the client's name because it gets read as if it's part of the client's name. And it could be that, Joe Smith, PhD, is going to get parsed, and he's going to be filed under PhD Joe. So just think in terms of how the system is parsing it and where it's putting the information. Don't cluster jobs. That's the one I had just told you. It needs to see the job title with the company name each and every time. Don't combine sections. And this is another one. If you're in the habit of, saying education and professional development and you're putting college degrees along with courses they took, they got a bachelor's degree and then they completed a Dale Carnegie training, you can't put those under the same heading. So if you're creating a resume where you're doing that, then you want to create a modified resume where you put the education, which is a college degree and a college name and a date, and then put those other professional development activities under a different heading. If you want to do affiliations and volunteer service, you want to break those up. So it's okay to combine them, but if you're submitting a document that that's going to be read by an ATS, you're going to provide your client with a second version. And the same thing if you're doing the NCRW exam, you may have to create another version. And I didn't realize I was running over. Introduce each section of the resume with the traditional headings. Don't make up headings like sales career or employment trajectory or anything creative, because the ATS, again, has like a template, says I'm looking for something under the heading professional experience, and I'm going to put the information here. And when it doesn't see a heading that says professional experience, it says, well, I don't know where the professional experience is. I guess they don't have any. So just think in terms of this ATS is actually making those determinations. You don't need to label the phone number in the email. These systems are smart. They recognize what an email is and what a phone number is, so you don't have to put those words there. The physical address isn't important. In other words, it doesn't need to see the street number and street name, but the city, state, and zip code are essential. And there seems to be an ongoing discussion about whether or not to put live links in the document, and I have gotten so many answers, I don't even know which one to give you anymore. So my advice is just don't put it in there, because some people say the systems won't read it, and some people say the systems will read it. So again, if you're writing for the least common denominator. So just in closing on the ATS then, the information that I shared for you came from Pat Cressito. She actually is the author of the book Barron's E-Resumes. And Pat did a webinar for the NRWA, which you can still download and listen to. And what Pat did is she did not just call HR departments and talk to them. She called the technology departments within companies, and she called the programmers that actually wrote these systems, and she interviewed them, and she has a very, very in-depth presentation that she did for the NRWA. And if you download that presentation, all of the information is in the slides, as well as after the presentation, she put out a Q&A based on all the questions she got afterwards. So that is an excellent resource. If you're a member of Career Thought Leaders, they also have a very wonderful little table that you can download from the website, and it is broken up into things that you are okay to do, things that you should be cautious about doing, and things to totally avoid doing. So that's kind of an overview of ATS. I'm sure there's a lot of individual questions. As I said, I suggest that you look at Pat's webinar and the tip sheets instead of me trying to answer questions one by one. Now, what we're going to do next week. Next week, I would have normally covered the proofreading and the NCRW process. So next week's our last class, and I am going to explain in depth how all the steps that are involved in becoming an NCRW, and I'm going to share the grading sheet with you and how we score things, and I'm going to give you all the inside looks so that you will know what's happening when you're going about the process. I think it's a lot better than going in the dark. So I'm even going to give you an example of the grading sheet so you know what you're being graded on. For the homework assignment, of course, everybody is going to be working on their final resume and the cover letter, but I'm also just going to send you out a resume and a cover letter with some errors in it, and I'm going to have you highlight the errors for me. That is part of the NCRW process. When you take the test, the first part of the test is we send you a resume with errors in it, and you have to find them. So I'm going to let you practice that before. I'm going to send that out to you sometime this week. And the part that I said that you could have some trepidation about is I'm going to do something a little bit different next week. Because I have not been sharing the homework assignments like I have in the past, because I've given everybody a chance to really get it together when they had a chance to do that. Next week, I'm going to ask each of you to share your resume and cover letter that you wrote for Candace and tell us a little bit about the strategy that you used. What did you do and why did you do it? There's two reasons I'm doing that. I want everybody to see how your coworkers are handling it, because there's so many different ways. But the other reason is when you submit a sample for the NCRW, one of the things you have to do is submit a written narrative justifying why you wrote the cover letter and the resume the way you did. So I'm going to give you some practice doing that. So that's what we're going to do next week, and we're going to start out by presenting the cover letters and resumes, and I'll pull up the resume and cover letter and go through all the proofreading errors so that we can see if everybody caught them all, and then I'll just run through what the whole NCRW process looks like, and then sadly that's going to be our last class. So I know you all hung with me, and it's 7:45. I'm going to unmute the line. If you want to get off the call, that's great. If you want to stay on and you have questions, I'll hang on here as long as you need me to. I lost my voice, though. So if anybody has to hang up, that's fine. Let me just kind of start. I'll start here at the bottom of the list and see. Brenda, are you still on the line, and did you have anything you wanted to say or ask?
No, I'm still here. I was a little curious about repeating the company name for each job if they've been with one company for a series of different positions.
Yeah, you have to be creative about doing that. So the main thing is, if you decided you really wanted to break out every position on the resume, the traditional way you write the company name and then current job title, the dates they were there, and you talk about that, and previous job title, the dates they were there, and you talk about that. To get through the ATS, you're going to need to go back in and create a second version of the resume, and every time you type the job title and the dates, you got to type the company name again.
Okay.
It's annoying, but you have to do that.
Okay.
Okay? But if you decide you don't want to break out the dates for each job title, well, then it's fine. The ATS won't mind. But every time it sees a job title with dates, it looks for the company name.
Okay.
Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. How about you, Tiffany Roberts?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I was wondering about the same thing. So should it be like a best practice then to provide clients with an ATS version that has it broken out? Because I like to do just the company name. I get a lot of people who seem to be with a company for 20 years but have had, 5 significant roles. But I don't want to repeat it over and over, so I'm wondering if they don't know if their next job application will be through an ATS, should we just make it practice to give them a copy, 2 different versions?
I try, when I'm writing and doing my strategy, I try to figure out what's the best way to present this so that I don't have to have 2 versions.
Okay.
So, again, and I was just looking for one of the samples you just sent me, Tiffany, to see if I could see an example. If you don't want to list every job and the dates they were on those jobs, that would be fine, and then you're safe. But let's say I want to say that you worked for ABC Company, and I'm going to list all 5 of your job titles and all 5 of the dates together, and then I'm going to start. One of the examples I showed in class a couple of weeks ago with the guy that was with the computer company, and he held like 10 different jobs, and I clustered them all together under the company name. That would never work with the ATS. So if you're doing something like that, then yes, you should give your client a second version. But the better strategy is figure out how to do it so you don't have to create 2 versions, because our clients just don't pay attention. To try to say to them, use this one if you're applying to an ATS, but don't use this.
So would it be appropriate then to just, I guess, list each job with the same employer multiple times? Because sometimes the positions are quite different. You know, maybe they've gone from coordinator to program manager to regional director or something, and so you would want to show those distinctions.
Yeah, if you want to show the distinctions, then the ATS is going to want to see the company names each time.
Okay.
And then it's a matter of helping the client understand why they're using two different resumes.
Right. Okay, thank you.
And that's where it's helpful to clue them in and go, hey, did you notice that little icon on the job announcement? Well, click on it. You'll be surprised what you find out. One of the things I learned about ICIMS is if you apply for a job using that system, your resume is in that system, and it can be used for other companies and other jobs. It's already in there.
So like, what if they're applying, if they're like putting their resume like on Indeed or in LinkedIn, you would have the same principle would apply, right? The ATS rules, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a hard one. I'll have to ponder how I want to answer that. I'll get an answer to you. I'm going to go back.
I've got a couple clients who are, you know, they want to upload their resume. You know, they applied for a specific job, and then they call me back and say, hey, how would I make the changes to put this on Indeed so it's open to multiple jobs? So that's kind of a big.
That's more of a job coaching question, Tiffany. We can talk about that science sometime if you want. Yeah, that's more coaching them on job search strategies because that's not effective what they're suggesting. But anyhow, LJ, did you get off the call or are you still with me?
No, I'm still here, but, you know, I guess I'm living this personally with my daughter who's applying for summer internships and the reality that her resume, when she uploads it, you know, it goes into all these different crazy fields, and she spends such a ridiculous amount of time house cleaning to make sure that wherever the information lands on the applicant tracking system or in the forms that the companies have, I'm like, and I said, well, wait, we're going to learn in class how to do this so I can turn your resume into something that you don't have to go through all this craziness with, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. So I'm curious to figure out how to.
I have your daughter's resume. I'll take a look at that again, and I can give you some ideas.
Yeah, I was thinking a stripped down text version would be a good thing for her to have.
An ASCII version?
No, it's like a stripped down text version that she could just use. That would be an asset. That would be helpful for any kid or any human that's going that route.
An ASCII version is always the safest way to go, but it's just not very pretty.
But we're not learning how to do that, right? No.
No, but I would be happy to walk you through that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you.
Well, when things settle down for you, because I have your daughter's resume, I'd be happy to help you figure out the best strategy for her so that she's getting the results she's looking for.
Well, considering she's telling all her friends I can help her, I'm going to be busy doing all this stuff. Thank you.
I'll make sure you know how to help her, LJ. How about you, Ronnie? Ronnie might have gotten off the call because she wasn't feeling well. And then I got Sheila. Looking to see who's still on here tonight. And it looks like, Doug, you're still on the call. I thought you had a meeting. I don't know. Maybe he hung up. Okay, and then Christina?
Hi, I'm here.
Okay, did you have anything?
Just the one question that came to mind. In addition to repeating the employer's name on each line each time you mention a new role, do you also have to put the location, or does that not matter?
I don't think the location matters.
Okay.
And I will check. I'll check some of the notes that I have to see if that question came up before.
Okay. I think that's it for now. I'll send you a note. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. And, you know, the best thing to do is when you run into a particular situation is to, you know, just consult some of the resources that are out there and see what's going to work best. But, you know, the overriding message always for our clients is, you know, employers hire people they know and people they like. Right. And regardless of the fact that the ATS seems to be driving the system, they can always make a personal contact to the employer. And, you know, making that personal contact may be just enough for the hiring manager to go to HR and go, I know this resume didn't make it through the system, but where is it? I want to talk to this guy. Because it's just a shame that people aren't getting through the systems and, you know, a lot of really talented people aren't getting a chance. So we really want to coach our clients to be more proactive and more personal in their job search. So it's big stuff, but don't let it freeze you up. Okay?
Sounds good.
So that was a lot tonight. Thanks for hanging with me, everybody, and those of you that are listening to the recording. We missed you, and make sure you let me know if you have any questions after you listen to the recording. So good night. I will talk to you all next week, and then I think I'm going to cry because you're all leaving me.